Well, hope you're all doing very well. Apologies, we have a lovely guest, but we have a lovely guest with a camera problem. Proves it's live, you see. Lovely technical things. So the lovely Jonny is here, but he's in the background. So we will go with this for now, and we can see if we can bring Jonny up at some point during the show if we can get his camera working. Anyway, so I hope you've all had a good week. Looking forward to hearing all about what you've all been up to, what's been going on in the world of franchising. So, how do we always start? We always start by explaining the premise of the show and what it's all about. So, the franchise show is, as you can imagine, all about franchising. And it's about a heck of a lot more than that. It's about being an entrepreneur and which way you might grow your business, and it's about being a franchisee, being a franchisor. You can be very experienced and still gain some value, or you can be very new to the industry, and it can help you come up with some different questions or make a more informed decision. So, what do we do each week? Each week we take a different topic and we have a lovely guest. And this week the topic is Don't Worry, It's Just a Franchise Audit. And we have a wonderful guest to go with that. We have the amazing Jonny Joseph, who is a franchise audit specialist. So, without further ado, I'd love to introduce the wonderful Jonny to you. So over to you, Jonny, there in the dark. Perhaps you could do a little introduction to yourself and franchise audits. And we'll start to get into the conversation and recognize a few people are here.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Harvey, for having me on, and hello to everybody around the world. I am based in Los Angeles, but I'm calling you from a site audit that I'm doing in Austin, Texas. So a lovely greeting from Austin, Texas. If you hear any screaming in the background, please disregard it. It just means the sedative is probably worn off on the franchisee here, and we'll get that taken care of in due course. So just to give everybody a little bit of a background, I started off my career working as a CPA, actually as a CA, at a chartered accountant in South Africa at one of the big four accounting firms, and came over to Los Angeles sometime in the last century and continued doing audits of very big companies. The annual corporate financial audit on audited financial statements, which is very different to a franchise audit, as we'll talk about a little bit later. I then spent a couple of years in the film industry working for a foreign film distributor, a United States company that sold international rights all around the world to US films. And after 2 years of suffering that, I went back to working as a professional, wanting to utilize my film experience, and worked for a CPA firm that specialized in auditing film and record companies. So I did that for about 17 years, finding millions of dollars each time I went to a film or record company for monies they owed to my clients. In 2012, my firm was acquired by BDO, and BDO had and still has a very significant franchising practice. And when they learned about the work that I'd been doing, they said, fantastic, we now have an additional service offering for our clients. So I started getting introduced to a lot of franchisors around the USA, and a couple of them saw a need for this kind of service. And so I started doing this back in 2012. So unlike the guest last week, Jitten, who started at a young age in franchising, I started a lot later in my career when I had a lot more experience doing things similar to this. And as people say to me, if you can audit Hollywood, you can audit anything. And that's what's given me the entree into doing this. So as the title of the session today might suggest to you, is my approach to these projects is to minimize the disruption and stress for the franchisee. The motto I go by is adding client value while maintaining or even enhancing relationships. And so what we get into here is two types of programs that franchisors like to implement. One is a compliance program versus a targeted program. And as a lot of people in the franchising world are aware of, the magic number is that 100 franchisees. So when a franchisor gets the size of 100 franchisees, they say the best practices is then to think about implementing a compliance program. So under a compliance program, you're selecting franchisees on a somewhat random basis. I encourage my clients, be careful not to go for just the big ones or just the small ones or just the ones on the East Coast of the United States or on the West Coast. You got to mix them up to demonstrate you really have a random program. There are legal issues if it appears that it's being targeted to franchisees that perhaps are not your favorite guys, or some other method that you're selecting that's not random. So the best practices that are out there is pretty much to audit every franchisee once during their franchise agreement term. And as many terms can be 10 years, 15 years, you're looking at doing approximately 10% of your system on an annual basis. Now, the interesting thing is they've shown that franchisors who implement this sort of a compliance program, in year one, system-wide, the royalties go up. Unrelated to the economy, unrelated to system growth, it just goes up. And they reckon it's due to franchisees not wanting to be embarrassed. If they get selected and I come out there, they don't want to be embarrassed by a bad result. So they start checking their numbers maybe a little bit more carefully, and the compliance gets a little bit stronger. That's anecdotal. I don't have any proof of that, but that's what I've heard.
Fantastic. That's a great introduction. Thank you, Jonny. Hopefully at some point we will be able to see you, but we can hear you. So that's wonderful. Before we get further into our conversation today, I just wanted to recognize a few people who have joined us here today. So I'll start with the wonderful Omar. Omar has a fantastic show called Zoom Party, and he also has another show where he gets to know certain individuals and asks them some questions. And I was on that show, so check out that one if you want to know a little bit more about me and some other wonderful people on there. Great to have you, Omar. We have the fantastic and the very wise Simon Wise with us, so it's going to be fantastic to hear what Simon has to say about audits and if he's ever got involved in those. Simon runs an organization called FranRec, and he is an expert in all things franchise recruitment. So if you're looking for some staff, then Simon's your man. So reach out to him. We've got the wonderful Paul Sims. Paul supports a post I do on a Sunday. Lovely chap. Really added some value when he was here last week. So really looking forward to hearing your thoughts today, Paul. We have the wonderful Penny Hopkinson. I always do it, but Penny has written a lovely book, and I will get this reversed at some point. In fact, watch this. You watch what I can do here. This will impress everybody. But look at that. There you go. There is her book in the corner. She is one of our lovely sponsors. It's fantastic to have you with us today, Penny, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on franchise audits and how that fits in with ops manuals and knowledge sharing. I think the two things are quite closely related, so it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts today, Penny, and thanks for being here again. We've got a LinkedIn user here. Unfortunately, don't know the name, but great to have you with us. Let us know who you are, and I will definitely recognize yourself. Someone's put, I recognize that accent. I assume they're meaning your accent there, Jonny. Very quickly, Jonny, whereabouts has your accent come from? What mix has created your lovely voice?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's really a mix of being born, raised, and going through the university system in South Africa, becoming a chartered accountant there, then coming over to Los Angeles some 40 plus years ago, and working for a New York-based company, and spending a lot of time in New York and talking to New Yorkers, and therefore there may be a little bit of New York that creeps in there. But it's probably more of a combination of South Africa and California.
Very good. Excellent. Well, it's always nice to know where people come from. So that's great. Thanks, Jonny. We've got the fantastic Jiten here today. It's great to have you here, Jiten. Always good to hear your thoughts. Jiten was a fantastic guest when he was on. Really added some great value to the show. So interesting to hear his thoughts on franchise audits as we get into things today. We've already said hello to Paul. We've got Malcolm here today. Malcolm, great to have you with us. Looking forward to catching up with you soon and continuing our conversations. We've got the lovely Don Cohen here. Don has got a great show all about LinkedIn strategy, LinkedIn Lives. He taught me everything I know about LinkedIn Lives. So if you like what I do, check out Don's shows as well. Fantastic chap. I'm going to come back to a comment here that Simon has put, because we're starting to get into things now, and it'd be great to have a look at what that one is. And there you go. I think that's the same LinkedIn user. It'd be great to know who you are. Thanks for being here, and really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So Jonny, if it would be all right, let's just start with a point here that Simon has made. And he's put, why wait till you get to 100 franchisees before you focus on compliance and quality control? Should it be initiated from number one, surely? What's your take on that as a question, Jonny?
Well, I think that's a great question. And it's not a rule I came up with, but I will try to defend it. The prevailing wisdom is, until you get to that 100 number, you're an emerging franchisor. And so you've got much bigger challenges, much bigger things that you want to deal with before you start getting into the financial compliance area. I do want to change the framework a little bit here as we continue this conversation, and that's to take away the most fearsome 5-letter word that I think exists in our language: audit. You say the word audit, and people immediately shrink and shudder, and fear comes across their faces for good reason. And we try to take that out of what we do by calling it a financial review. And so we feel that already takes the edge off when you refer to this process as a financial review process rather than an audit process. And it really goes to the approach that we're trying to take here, which is we're trying to minimize the invasion in your business, the disruption to your business, and the level of work required to get through this little program, this little event that we're going to go through together. So we call it a financial review. And I established right from the beginning in my very first communication, which is an email, don't worry, I'm not going to create any extra work for you. Everything I'm going to ask you for is readily available or readily produced out of your accounting system. And I think the person on the other end, when they read that, they immediately can start to relax, knowing this is not going to be as disastrous as they probably had in their mind when they got the call initially from my client to say, congratulations, you've hit the jackpot. You've been selected for a financial review. So we try put everybody's mind to rest, put them at ease. This is not going to be as bad as you think it is. And without fail, every time I wrap one of these up, that's the feedback I get. Boy, I didn't think it was going to be, I thought it was going to be much worse than this. I didn't think it was going to be so easy.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, it's about relationships as well. I mean, doing what you do is all about managing a relationship and getting on well with that franchisee. We've got a good question here from Malcolm. Malcolm's put, what's your experience, Jonny, in getting franchisees to self-audit? Now, that's an interesting thing. What's your definition of self-auditing? Do you think that's in preparation for one of your audits, getting things in order, so that when you do come along, things are all shipshape? Or what's your take
Well,
on this little question?
yeah, that's a great question. And in the franchise space, I've really never experienced anybody doing a self-audit before I come in. In other industries, I have had that experience where my client has sent out the notification, the congratulations, you've hit the jackpot, you've been selected. And it's amazed me how sometimes people have come back and said, gee, in preparation for this audit, I did some work and I found we have an extra $300,000 we should have paid you last year. So that has happened in other industries, but it's never happened to me in the franchise space. Typically, the preparation that everybody's doing for me is they're providing me with financial statements, audited financial statements if they have them, bank statements, tax returns, and various reports that they're running out of their accounting system. So we're not actually having them do any process that would compare the numbers that they've submitted versus the numbers that I'm going to be looking at. So they could do it, of course, but nobody seems to do that. And so I come in and it's, we're at the start line and off we go and do the work.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that, Jonny. I think it's really interesting when we talk about that number of 100s, from a standpoint of being there in the US, 100 franchisees, is where it starts to get bigger. I think perhaps here in the UK, 100 franchisees is quite a sizable franchise business. So it may well be that there's perhaps a slightly different model involved in other regions around the world. But I imagine that there's still a number that warrants using a service such as yours. But some really interesting points there. Let's just have a look at a comment here. There's a good one here from Robert. First of all, Bob, we call him, but Bob, welcome to the show as usual. You're a regular to the show. It's always fantastic to have you here. And Bob's put, do you use a software system, checklist system, to audit different indices of the franchisee? That's a good question. Without obviously giving too much away of your tricks of the trade, is there some good systems that you can use that allow for consistency within those audits between?
Yeah, that really is a good question. And if we're going to go back to using the technical term audit, which is not a bad idea actually for the purpose of this conversation, the franchise audit or a royalty audit is different to a financial statement audit. And that's the beauty of it. Under financial statement audits, you've got governing bodies that regulate how an audit must be done of a company's financial statements that are used by the SEC and other regulatory bodies. In doing a royalty audit or a franchisee financial review, it's really up to the client. So each client that I do work for, we do a lot of preparatory work before we do the very first engagement. And so we'll meet and we'll discuss which are the records that they want me to look at. And in some cases, it's strictly financial records. In some cases, it's more operational type things. There's a fitness club that I do some work for where they want me to look at the fitness membership forms that have been filled out because they have various discount programs that tend to get abused. So I'm looking at non-financial records in that situation. So each franchisor requires us to tailor make the program for them. So we will design procedures to be performed to achieve whatever objective they're looking for out of this process. Again, for many, it's a focus on royalties, but some of them want me to look at operational things. Some of them want me to look at compliance things like insurance. So that's the beauty of it, is the client gets to decide what needs to be done, and I give them the best advice I can give them based on my experience.
That's great. And actually, I brought up this point here, or this question from Penny. Penny is an ops manual specialist and sponsoring the show, and I think she makes a really interesting point here, because this is exactly a point you just made there. Because Penny's put, are you suggesting that the franchise audit is purely financial? Typically, the audits covered in the operations manual explain everything from customer service to branding and financial reviews conducted annually. But Jonny, you were saying exactly that it depends on the brief from the franchisor as to what elements they want to keep that consistency by having those audits. Would you say that that's correct? I mean, are some of those other things like customer service or branding, are they harder to audit? And does that fall into your remit?
I would say that's spot on. And I have had engagements where the franchisor has said to me, we've recently gone through rebranding. We need you to check the signage. We need you to connect the paperwork. We need you to take a look at the displays in the business and make sure it's all the current signage and it's none of the old signage. Or in the case of service industries, that the wraps on the vans are all updated. So yes, it can include all of that. And, it does make sense where you do have a wide dispersion of franchisees and you're sending me out there to do stuff. Why not throw in the operational stuff? Because I'm there anyway. And it doesn't take a lot of time to look at it and document it. So it absolutely provides opportunities for efficiencies and of scale and so forth when you're out there. And
yeah.
by the way, Penny, thank you for sponsoring. I feel very special that you selected this show to sponsor.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that.
That's great. I just want to recognize a couple of people that have joined a little bit later on before we get to another few questions. So Danny's here. Great to have Danny here. Look, I'm going to promote her book, even though she's not sponsoring it, but I love to promote people who support our show. So she's got a lovely book here and does a fantastic service to go along with that. And Danny is going to be a guest on the show, and I'm really, really looking forward to getting into the conversation with Danny. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts today, Danny, on this subject of audits and consistency and ways of keeping that consistency. We've got a question which we'll get into, and I've been multitasking and I found out that this is Sean Goldsmith. So it's fantastic to see you here, Sean. Thank you for your thoughts. We're going to come back to this one in a minute. Just wanted to check. We've got a couple of other people that I want to recognize. In case you are just joining us, today we are talking about franchise audits with the wonderful Jonny Joseph. And we're really getting into this conversation. There's some great questions coming in. Looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts as we continue this chat. And we have a legend with us. We've got Joe Caruso, who does a fantastic franchising audio chat on a Friday, of which I'm a regular listener to. So we're going to come back to Joe's question in a minute as well. I just want to recognize one more person who has joined us a bit later on, and that's Sharon as well. And Sharon's put, new to the group, great info thus far. Welcome to the Franchise Show. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. Hopefully you can join us on future episodes. Right, let's quickly go up here to a comment here by Sean. So Sean has put, we are currently conducting remote site audits for a few of our clients in the UK, US, and Australia. Financial reviews get done on an annual basis and often in person. Any thoughts on remote versus in person and the benefits? What a great question. What's your take on that, Jonny?
That's a fabulous question. And I go back to the dark days of 2020 and 2021 when some sort of a cold kind of shut the world down. And I offered my clients who I do this work in person for, they like me to be on site. They want me to go visit the locations. And I said, during this time of shutdown, my recommendation is you keep your program going, because as soon as you drop off on your program, certain things start to happen which are not good for you. And so you want to keep the momentum. And a lot of them initially said, well, nobody's traveling at the moment, so we don't want to do anything. And then as things started to open up again, they still had some reluctance to do it because of the travel. And people were nervous about having other people coming into their places of business and so forth. And I said to them, our model for doing this is to request all the documentation be sent to me electronically ahead of my visit anyway. So before I go out to any location, I'm getting all the records I need electronically ahead of time. And I said, I could easily do this in my home office and create the same result other than being there in person to work with the folks over there. The negative of doing it remote is you're not front and center of their attention. So typically I go to a location for 2 to 3 days. And for those 2 or 3 days, I'm sitting in the office next to the person who's handling my work. And as and when I have questions, I can pop into their office and they can respond to me reasonably timely. When you're doing it remotely, you're communicating remotely. And so your question, your request is just another item on their desk. And so what I found is when you do it remotely, the interaction isn't quite as smooth, and the time period to complete the project tends to take longer and sometimes much longer. So there is a definite benefit to being on site, but there could be a lot of good reasons to do them remotely. Also, not the least of which is the travel cost, right? So you're avoiding the travel cost of me being there in person, but I think on the negative side, the franchisor likes having the presence of somebody out there, which kind of also sends a message to the rest of the system. Somebody can drop by your office at some time in the future, so be prepared.
That's a great answer to that question. Thank you, Jonny. Really appreciate that. Let's have a look at, we've got a good long comment here from Penny. And Penny's put, oh no, we've already seen that one, sorry. But so let's have a look at another one. We've got a comment here from Joe. Let's go back to Joe's comment. And Joe's put, are you checking franchise agreements and leases to ensure that they are coterminous? It's a good word. I don't know. And that the franchisee insurance names the franchisor as an additional insured. This is a great point. What's your take on this one, Jonny?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, that has been part of my purview in certain situations, is to look at insurance, make sure the coverage limits are as prescribed by the franchise agreement, and also that the additional insureds are included on the certificate of insurance that is issued by the insurance companies. So that is definitely an area that we do look at. In terms of the leases being coterminous with the franchise agreement, I haven't come across that one yet, but that is certainly a procedure that's can be easily implemented and performed.
Great. No, brilliant question, Joe. Thanks for that one. Let's have a look here at what Malcolm has put. Penny Hopkinson, most franchise agreements have the right to do a financial audit. Tend to use this when the franchisees are not using the brand EPOS system. Yeah, I mean, the EPOS system, that must be a real a really fantastic tool for you in terms of some of the financial elements, because everything should be going through that till and balancing up. I mean, do you find that the EPOS system and the till system and ordering and all those sorts of things is where you can iron out any concerns or problems when you're doing your job?
Well, there's a saying in the auditing profession that if you have someone who goes to extraordinary lengths to perform and commit fraud, the chances of us catching it are very small. But I have on occasion found revenues being recorded off the books, and it's without giving any secrets away, it's often obvious to see these things because the inputs are not matching. In other words, if you're a construction company doing work on a project by project basis and ordering materials specific to a job, then your gross profit from year to year should be pretty consistent. And when you find a sudden large drop in revenue from one year to the next, with direct costs being cost of sales, which is oftentimes materials used for the projects, maintaining a similar level, then you can immediately recognize that there's a good chance that revenues are not finding their way into the books. The interesting thing is, most companies are not making such super profits that they can handle all their obligations without having all the revenue. So the cheater has to find some way to get that revenue back on the books. And so we look for certain indicators of that happening. And so we're using corroborating and different sources of information to determine if there are monies other than those being reported. And so I often smile when I talk to franchisors and they tell us, oh, we do a great job of auditing everybody because all their numbers are in our building. They're all using our general ledger systems and we can look at all their numbers. And I always chuckle and say to them, yes, you can see what they're telling you, but you can't see what they're not telling you.
Yes, absolutely. And perhaps that's one of those big reasons when we were discussing there about the difference between remote and physically being there. You can discover a lot more things. And I think it's about that focus, that time together, and like you said, during that period of time, you get to know that franchisee and always leave on a high, having, helped them in their business. So yeah, I think it's a great question. Let's have a little look. I've got a good question here from Joe, actually, and Joe's put, what are some of the more startling discoveries you've found on audits? I think there's you must have some real stories, without obviously giving any private information away. But has there been a real standout story going back in the past that you've had to resolve, or a big win for either party, or something like that?
I have a great one. So I used to do work for a very big franchisor with a number of service brands in their stable. And they had one in particular, and which had a franchisee, the biggest franchisee out of the whole portfolio that they had. He was paying the largest number and amount of royalties each month. But they suspected that he might be operating a competing business out of his same 4 locations that he had. So they retained us. We were doing a regular compliance program for them anyway, but this was what we would call a targeted an audit. So they thought something might be up, and so they hired us to do this. And it was like a finely tuned FBI sting operation in the sense that we had 4 locations across 3 states. And I set up 4 different groups to go into those 4 locations at exactly the same time on exactly the same day. So it was a real, okay, guys, synchronize your watches. It's T minus 1 hour and counting. And we literally went into these 4 locations simultaneously so they wouldn't have time to let each other know that somebody's coming. Well, I had the good fortune to go to one. And as I walked in the door, I introduced myself. I said, "Hi, I'm here. I'm here to visit with the franchise operation." And I was greeted by a lovely lady. And she said, "Which one?" I said, "What do you mean, which one?" And she said, "Well, to the left, we have XYZ company. And to the right, we have ABC company." And they were in the same industry, one of which was the franchise.
Okay.
And I said, "Well, I'm here for this one." And she said, "Great, I'll call out the manager." And the guy came out, and he was literally wearing a shirt branded with the one company, and he gave me a business card with his name and the other company on it.
I thought you were going to say half of his shirt was one company and half was the other, and he would just turn round one way.
Well, I'm sure if I'd given him time, we would have gone in the back and changed his shirt.
Oh, that's a fantastic example, and what a great story of that. And to show how valuable it is to work hard to maintain that consistency and to maintain that support of franchisees via, you're buying into a model, you're buying into something that has already been tried and tested. And if you divert from that model too much, then what was the point in having it in the first place? So it's good to make sure you keep on track. Let's have a little look at a comment here from Simon. Simon's put, as a franchisee, Simon was also a franchisee in his past as well, for driver hire. He used to get a financial audit every quarter, VAT, PAYE, etc., and a quality control compliance twice a year. Because Jonny, you were saying there that it's standard practice for the audits to happen once in a sort of a franchise agreement period, whether that's 5 years or so maybe that's a difference between perhaps company and company. Are there companies out there that do that much more regularly for their franchisees?
Well,
Or is it
I think you have to be very careful when we throw around the word audit. In other words, I see that in newspapers. I hear it on television. Such and such a organization is going to be doing an audit of this, that, or the other. And so the term is used very loosely. And I think in that example of PAYE and sales tax and stuff like that, that's really just a recalculation of the obligation and comparing it to what was reported or paid, which is, one small component of what I do in a franchise audit.
Yeah.
The scale of it and the cost of it can vary greatly. And so, for example, my standard review period is a 3-year period. But you don't have to do it over 3 years. You can do it over 2 years. You can do it on an annual basis. You could do it over a 5-year period. It just depends on the needs of the system. And like I said before, it's really up to the franchisor to decide the extent of the procedures. And, do you want me to do 10 different things? Or do you want me to go in and look at 2 or 3 of the key items that you're concerned about? And so what I find the beauty of this is a financial audit is very expensive. In the US, to get a financial audit of a small company for anything under $25,000 or $30,000 is almost impossible. The jargon is to open a file costs $5,000, right? So just to start the whole thing without doing any work is about $5,000. And it's about the same to write the report at the end. In the franchise audit space, we can tailor it that it's going to cost you $2,000 per audit. My standard 3-year, very comprehensive financial review is only about $5,000 or $6,000 with any travel or out-of-pocket costs that there may be. So for one of my big clients, I had a finding of about $200,000 last year. And the joke that I threw at them was, this is great. Now you've got all your compliance audits that I'm going to do for you paid for the next 2 years. Even if I find nothing, you'll be breaking even over a 2-year period. And to anticipate the follow-up question is, how often do you find nothing? Not very often. Not very often. Maybe 1 out of 20.
Yeah, exactly. And that can just be, that's part of it. It can help finance these things. And yeah, really, really interesting point that you make there. Before we get on to a couple more questions, just in case anybody has joined us at this late stage, we are talking franchise audits with the wonderful Jonny Joseph. I wanted to say that if anyone wants to sponsor this show, and also I want to test whether this works, so if somebody could just test it, there's a QR code on the screen, so I want to see if that works. So if someone could scan it, it would be lovely. And sponsor would be also great. Anyway, there was a question that I had, Jonny, which was, what's the favorite part of your job? That was one of my questions. I'll occasionally throw in one.
Well, the favorite part of my job is when I'm at a location, and of course, my client is the franchisor. It's not the franchisee. But my favorite part of the job is when I leave the location and 3 things happen. Firstly, I insist on having a closing meeting with the franchisee. I don't want them to be left with anxiety and uncertainty over what I found and what my conclusions are. So I sit down with them. I have a laptop computer with a portable screen, and I turn my portable screen around so that they can see all the work that I've done, and I run them through the detail of the work I've done so they can see exactly what I've done. And if they want, I'll even email them a copy of the schedule so that they can go through. The second part that I really enjoy is when I'm able to say, I see that you're doing this or you're doing that, and it really may help you if you try to do this or change that. So I add real value to them as a business owner. And of course, that's not my primary purpose, but I really look for opportunities to do that so they feel they got something positive out of the experience too. And the very best thing is when I leave with them having a smile on their face and saying, can we stay in touch? I've really enjoyed working with you. And I've had people who call when they come to Los Angeles and say, hey, I'm visiting from wherever they're from, and I thought I'd just give you a call and see if we can get together. And this is a guy who I was supposed to have tortured for 3 days. So when I can make friends, and I often do, I really do, I leave with a really good feeling that, I've done my job effectively. They may have had to write a check, and I always say to them, listen, the result of what I've done is great. You were, off by 1% or 1.5%, but I understand that means you're going to write a check for $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, and that shouldn't be minimized. But on the other hand, your revenue is $40 million over that three-year period. And for you to owe only that is a fantastic result. So you should be proud of it. I just want to add that in the royalty space, whether it's franchises or other products, there's a industry norm of 3%. So variance of up to 3% is almost expected on every audit. So in a lot of franchise agreements, there'll be a provision that says franchise audits may be required at franchisor expense. However, if the findings exceed a certain percentage of the amounts reported during the period, then the franchisee will be responsible for the cost of the audit. And sometimes they say limited to $10,000 or $15,000. So everybody knows it's not going to be a crazy number. It can't be the sky's the limit. But it is generally perceived as we expect a 3% up to a 3% variance.
I think it's great that you have that transparency when you do your work, that you show people what's going on the screen and you try and explain to them what's industry standard, that it doesn't have to be 100%, and that a few mistakes here and there happen, and that it's okay within a certain parameter. I imagine that helps a lot of people feel better. I appreciate you answering that question, because that was one of mine. Bit selfish there, but thank you, Jonny.
Yeah.
Let's get back to some great questions by the fantastic people here. Bob's put, how often do you get pushback from franchisees on the process? do you find that you get some franchisees that are a little difficult to deal with? In fact, there's another question here that's very similar, and I'm imagining this is still from Sean. What is your experience in dealing with belligerent, successful franchisees? Often more difficult than unsuccessful ones, in my experience. These two questions, I think, relate, so we'll put them both up. But what's your take on this one?
Oh, there's always one. There's always one that's going to be a problem, pretty much on an annual basis. I'll always have one. The story that I told you of the FBI type sting operation that we did, that individual, we notified him in April that we were going to come in and do an audit. And he said, well, we're approaching the summertime and I'm going to be away and this one's going to be doing this and this one's going to be doing that. And we said, well, how about this date? And he said, well, I don't know. It's so far in the future. And we ultimately agreed on a date. And as we got closer, and as I would send him reminders, just a reminder, we're going to be there next month, he started pushing back. And this isn't going to be ready, and that's not going to be ready. And of course, in this case, we had a special purpose. We were trying to discover if he was operating the competing franchise. So we were less concerned with him being ready with the records. And we were due to go there on the Monday, and on the Friday, I was still corresponding and communicating with him, and he was still pushing back. And on the Friday, I said, we've scheduled this for a long time. We agreed to this date, and we will be coming in on Monday. And we did. We went in on Monday, and of course, they didn't have the records that we had requested. But again, the primary purpose was to be on site and see what we could see. It ultimately went to an arbitration, and they had to produce all the records anyway, and we worked through it. And the conclusion, in case anyone's wondering, is he was forced to give up the franchise. He was required to pay a settlement of about 1.2 million in underreported royalties over, I think it was a 5-year period for these 4 locations. And everybody, went their separate ways.
But it's, not every story has a happy conclusion. But then it is for the franchisor, because the relationship has to work, and it has to work where everyone knows what they're doing and what parameters that they're working within. And it's a really, really important part of the process in franchising. We are starting to draw towards the end of the session today, but there's a couple of other questions. Let's see if we can get to those before we conclude. So we've got a comment here by Joe. Often audits are driven by concerns on under-reporting. And if the reporting is off by 5% or more, the franchisee pays the audit cost depending on the franchise agreement. Since you do this, how often does the franchisor collect, if ever? That's a great question. What do you think of that question from Joe, Jonny?
Well, again, for the amount to be found to be greater than that 5% is somewhat unusual. But as I shared with you, I did have a rather large one last year, and they did have to pay the cost of the audit, in addition to all the back royalties that they could reach back for. And this was an underreporting for about 10 years. And under the statute of limitations, legally, they could only go back about 6. So in some respects, the franchisor got off easy, paying for 6 years and the costs. But, as you said, let's go back to this is a relationship-driven business model. And the agreements do provide for these audits to take place. And if a franchisee is going to push back hard enough and be non-compliant and uncooperative enough, they stand the chance of losing the franchise. And do you really want to lose your whole business over a industry recognized best practice anyway? And I think from the franchisor standpoint, if the guy's not going to cooperate, you probably don't want him anyway.
No, it's a good point. We are drawing towards an end. Let's have a quick look if there are any others before we sort of conclude. Oh, look at that. Simon's put the QR code works, and Jen's just sent me some pounds. Thank you, Simon. That's amazing. Penny has also put QR code works. Look at that. Look at me with the technology. Hey. Let's just very quickly pull up this one, and then I think we'll make that the last one. Should the compliance QC function be part of the ongoing support provided to the franchisee by the franchisor rather than an external costed resource? It's quickly touching on that. Have companies attempted to do what you do internally, and what are the benefits of using an external company for that? And actually, because we're getting towards the end, I normally give people the opportunity to explain what they do, and a good way of getting in touch with you. So perhaps you could answer that question and let people know about your business and best way to get in touch with you, because that's how we always conclude.
Sure. So the old conundrum of do something in-house or get someone external to do it. I think a lot of companies like using the external resource because it's not the franchisor versus the franchisee. It's a third party. And I think the franchisors feel that the franchisee is more receptive to having an outside third party than someone from corporate.
Get it?
Corporate's in their business enough as it is throughout the year. And I think they see it as somewhat of a de-escalation of the anxiety to have this third party, friendly, nice guy like me show up. There are some who do this kind of work in other industry areas that are very aggressive in the work they do. And that doesn't play in this environment. As I said right at the beginning, my goal is to enhance the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee, not sour the relationship by being abrasive or disagreeable or obnoxious.
Sure.
So I think there's that. There's also the benefit of a specialist. This is what I do all the time. To get that in-house would be very expensive.
Sure.
For me to be an employee of a company would be very expensive for them. And using someone with lesser experience or lesser technical ability, I don't think works.
And what's the best way to get hold of you and utilize your services?
I think in terms of getting in touch with me, LinkedIn is probably the easiest for people around the world to find me and get in touch. I've received some invitations already from some participants here, so I thank them for that. And I look forward to talking to more people. I do offer a free kind of a evaluation of situation service, whereby you can send me an agreement, which, whether it's in the franchise space or any other space where there's a royalty reporting obligation, a joint venture, whatever, I'll look at the agreement. I'll look at some statements perhaps and say, you really should do this, or maybe it's not such a good idea. The cost will outweigh the benefit.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jonny, for that. So if anybody is looking for Jonny's services, please reach out to him on LinkedIn. Well, look, we've now come towards the end, and in fact, we have come to the end. So I wanted, first of all, to thank the wonderful Jonny Joseph for his time today and sharing his valuable experience and inspiring our conversation today. And I'd like to absolutely thank our wonderful community of franchise enthusiasts that are always here and that really genuinely drive the show. The comments that come up, I so enjoy reading them. I get a huge amount of value myself. It really makes this show what it is. So a big thank you to everyone here, and I hope you can all be here next week. And talking of next week, next Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. GMT and 12:15 EST, I think if the clocks are right, we have the wonderful Red Boswell. Now, I think most people will know Red, and we're going to be talking about the subject of jumping into franchising. If If you check out Red's profile picture, you'll understand why. But we're also going to be looking at making that decision, how quickly, what that process is. So it's going to be a great conversation with Red and with all of you. So until next time, have an amazing week ahead, and I will see you next week.